Hey everyone, today, we're diving into one of ancient Rome's most intriguing secrets, the night rituals of the Praetorian Guard that most history books conveniently leave out. Picture this: torches flickering against marble walls, armored men moving silently through imperial corridors, and secrets that could topple an empire. That's where we're heading today. Before we begin, if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and notification bell. You don't want to miss what's coming next. The Praetorian Guard, Rome's elite imperial bodyguards, have fascinated historians for centuries. We know they protected emperors, sometimes killed them, and wielded extraordinary political power. But what happened when darkness fell over Rome? What secret rituals and practices did these men perform away from the public eye? Most historical accounts focus on their daytime duties and political machinations. But tonight, we're peeling back the curtain on what these feared guardsmen did after sunset, practices so private that many were deliberately omitted from official accounts. Now, I know what you're thinking. If these rituals were hidden, how do we know about them at all? Great question. One I'd be asking too. The answer lies in fragmentary evidence. Archaeological discoveries, cryptic references in personal correspondence, graffiti in barracks, and accounts from sources the official historians tried to silence. The Praetorians weren't just soldiers. They were the ultimate insiders, privy to imperial secrets and wielding tremendous influence. Formed by Augustus in 27 BCE, these men weren't your average legionaries. They served shorter terms, 16 years instead of 25, received nearly triple the standard pay, and lived in relative luxury compared to frontier troops. But with privilege came responsibility and secrecy. The cohorts, numbering between 9, 0 and 12, 0 men depending on the era, maintained order in Rome while protecting the emperor. At least that's what the public saw. What most Romans never witnessed were the night rituals that bound these men together, ensured their loyalty, and sometimes determined the fate of emperors. From secret religious ceremonies to covert training, from intelligence gathering to hidden tribunals, the nighttime activities of the Praetorians shaped Roman history from the shadows. And it's not just the rituals themselves that make this story compelling. It's how desperately certain emperors tried to control, reform, or abolish these practices, recognizing their potential danger. When you control the night rituals of the Praetorian Guard, you control Rome itself. So join me as we reconstruct these hidden practices, piecing together evidence from archaeology, overlooked texts, and the fragments historians tried to erase. By the end of our journey, you'll understand why some emperors feared sunset more than any foreign army. Let's begin with perhaps the most important night ritual of all, one that determined whether emperors lived or died. The most feared and secretive of all Praetorian night rituals wasn't recorded in any official history. In fact, if you were a Roman chronicler who valued your life, you'd know better than to document it at all. I'm talking about what surviving fragments suggest was called the Midnight Tribunal, a practice that essentially put emperors themselves on trial in absentia. Imagine this. Deep within the Castra Praetoria, the Praetorian barracks built by Tiberius in 23 CE, select officers would gather in a chamber historians believe was located beneath the northeast corner of the complex. Archaeological excavations in the 1950s uncovered a sealed room that doesn't appear in any architectural plans, with unusual acoustics and seating arranged in a semicircle. Fragments of writing tablets found there contain cryptic references to judgment and worthiness of the purple. The Midnight Tribunal wasn't held on a regular schedule. Rather, it was convened when enough high-ranking Praetorians harbored doubts about the current emperor's fitness to rule. And here's the fascinating part. They developed an elaborate ritual framework to justify what was essentially a conspiracy. Modern scholars believe the practice began under Sejanus, the notorious Praetorian prefect who nearly seized power during Tiberius's reign. After his fall, rather than abandoning the practice, the Praetorians institutionalized it with stricter protocols to prevent any single prefect from controlling the process. So how did it work? Based on reconstructed accounts and archaeological evidence, we can piece together the basics. The ritual began at midnight, symbolic for representing the midpoint between days, belonging to neither. The timing was significant. Under Roman religious law, Decisions made in this liminal period existed in a kind of legal shadow zone. 7 senior centurions would form the tribunal corps, with the most senior among them acting as arbiter noctis, judge of the night. They would place an empty curule chair, the ceremonial seat of Roman magistrates, in the center, representing the absent emperor. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and where I need to interrupt the flow for a moment. You guys know I'm meticulous about sources, right? This reconstruction comes primarily from fragmentary tablets found at the Castra Praetoria site, corroborated by cryptic references in private letters between Praetorian officers discovered in a villa outside Rome in the 1970s. Official histories wouldn't touch this stuff with a 10-foot gladius. Back to the ritual. Each tribunal member would approach the empty chair and whisper one charge against the emperor. These charges weren't recorded. That would be too dangerous. But they likely centered on traditional Roman concerns, neglecting religious duties, military incompetence, moral corruption, or threats to the privileges of the Praetorian Guard itself. After all charges were laid, the arbiter noctis would place a white stone and black stone before the empty chair. Each officer would then take either stone, white indicating continued loyalty, black indicating withdrawal of support. The stones were placed in a bronze urn called the Vessel of Fate. If black stones outnumbered white, the tribunal didn't immediately sentence the emperor to death. That would be too crude for the elaborate moral framework they'd constructed. Instead, they authorized what they called vigilance, essentially placing the emperor under heightened surveillance and beginning to sound out potential replacements. However, if a second tribunal reached the same conclusion, and archaeological evidence suggests at least 3 emperors faced this double judgment, the Praetorians would begin actively planning for imperial transition. It's a nice euphemism for assassination. Evidence strongly suggests that Caligula, Nero, and Commodus all faced negative verdicts from multiple tribunals before their deaths. In fact, graffiti discovered in the barracks includes a tally mark system that appears to track tribunal outcomes, with distinct marks beside the names of emperors who were eventually overthrown. What makes this ritual particularly fascinating is how it formalized treason. By wrapping conspiracy in ritual trappings, the Praetorians gave themselves a pseudo-religious and pseudo-legal framework for judging their supposed master. It transformed potential betrayal into a solemn duty. And here's the clincher. The one emperor who definitely discovered the Midnight Tribunal? Claudius. Ancient biographers writing decades later, often with political grudges, report that after learning of the practice following Caligula's assassination, rather than abolishing it, he co-opted it. He allegedly attended in disguise, argued for himself, and used the ritual to identify officers whose loyalty wavered. Whether you call it a treasonous conspiracy or a constitutional check on imperial power depends entirely on your perspective. But one thing's clear. No emperor could rest easy, knowing that somewhere in the night, his fate might be decided by men sworn to protect him. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Rome's hidden history, take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates the darker side of ancient history. Your support helps us continue uncovering stories that others prefer to leave buried. Let's talk about how ordinary soldiers became members of history's most elite and feared military unit. The transformation from legionary to Praetorian wasn't simply a matter of reassignment. It was a complete rebirth through ritual. When examining the Praetorian Guard, most historians focus on their political role or military function. But archaeological evidence and overlooked texts reveal an elaborate initiation system that took place exclusively at night, deliberately hidden from public view and official records. Selection for the Praetorians was ostensibly based on merit, exceptional service, physical prowess, and unwavering loyalty. But being chosen was just the beginning. The real transformation occurred during what fragmentary evidence suggests was called the Night of Iron and Blood, held during the new moon, the darkest night of the month. Initiations took place in sections of the Castra Praetoria, specifically designed for this purpose. Excavations in the 1960s revealed a curious underground chamber beneath the western section of the barracks, containing drainage channels, iron fittings in the walls, and unusual acoustic properties that would amplify certain sounds while dampening others. The ritual began with isolation. For 3 days before initiation, candidates were kept in darkened cells, deprived of sleep, and given only water mixed with herbs that modern analysis suggests had mild hallucinogenic properties. This sensory deprivation and alteration was designed to break down their existing identity, making them receptive to their new role. When night fell on the third day, the actual initiation began. Candidates were blindfolded and led to the underground chamber, where they would undergo a series of physical ordeals and symbolic deaths. First came the surrender of identity. Candidates were stripped of their legionary insignia, and any personal items were ceremonially destroyed. The message was clear: your old self no longer exists. Next came the trial of fortitude. Candidates received ritual cuts or brands. Archaeologists have noted distinctive scarring patterns on Praetorian skeletal remains that don't match typical battle injuries. These marks, usually on the chest or forearm, created permanent reminders of their transformation and bound them to their Praetorian brothers through shared pain. I should note here that this section discusses historical allegations about initiation practices in antiquity. We'll focus on the political implications and evidence without graphic detail. The most significant part of the initiation was the blood oath, or Sacramentum Nocturnum, the night oath. Unlike the standard military oath taken by all Roman soldiers in daylight, this second, secret oath bound Praetorians to additional obligations. Fragmentary evidence suggests the oath included pledges to guard imperial secrets, to obey the Praetorian prefect even against the emperor if necessary, and, most controversially, to put the guard's interests above conventional Roman law. Archaeological evidence supports this reconstruction. A lead curse tablet discovered in 1982 near the Praetorian barracks contains what appears to be a death curse against an officer who betrayed the night words. Similarly, graffiti found in the barracks includes cryptic references to Brothers of the Dark Oath. After taking the oath, initiates participated in a symbolic rebirth. They would emerge from the underground chamber into the barracks courtyard where their new Praetorian brothers waited. Each would receive their distinctive uniform and equipment, not just symbols of status, but items believed to carry spiritual significance after being consecrated in night rituals. The final stage involved a shared feast that lasted until dawn. This wasn't just celebration. It served a practical purpose by creating witnesses. Every Praetorian present would know who had undergone the ritual, creating mutual accountability. You knew who was a true Praetorian because you watched them be reborn. Wait, I can already hear some of you history buffs typing furiously in the comments. But what about Cassius Dio's accounts? He never mentions this. You're right, and that's by design. Our understanding comes not from official histories, but from archaeological evidence, private correspondence, and religious dedications that hint at these practices. The most telling evidence may be what emperors did when they feared the guard. When Vespasian took power in 69 CE after the year of 4 emperors, he dismissed many Praetorians loyal to Vitellius. Before inducting new members, he altered the initiation chamber, removing certain religious symbols and installing windows, literally bringing light to a ceremony defined by darkness. Similarly, when Septimius Severus disbanded the existing Praetorian Guard in 193 CE and reformed it with his own loyal troops, he specifically outlawed nocturnal oaths and private ceremonies, a clear reference to these initiation practices. The initiation rituals served multiple purposes. They created unbreakable bonds between Praetorians, established a parallel loyalty structure that sometimes competed with allegiance to the emperor, and surrounded the guard with an aura of mystery and fear that enhanced their power. For a Roman emperor, these night rituals represented both security and threat. The same ceremonies that ensured Praetorians would die protecting you also created a brotherhood capable of removing you if their mysterious nighttime deliberations deemed it necessary. Before we continue to our next segment on the Guard's intelligence gathering methods, take a moment to comment below with other historical mysteries you'd like us to investigate in the future. Your engagement directly shapes what topics we explore, and I read every comment personally. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who appreciates the hidden mechanisms of power throughout history. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. There's much more fascinating historical content to come. Now, let's continue with perhaps the least understood aspect of the Praetorian Guard, their sophisticated intelligence network that operated exclusively at night. When we think of ancient intelligence gathering, we rarely give Rome enough credit. The Praetorians developed what may have been the ancient world's most effective domestic surveillance system, a network they called the Noctis Ors, or Ears of the Night. Unlike their daytime security functions, which were highly visible and ceremonial, Their nighttime intelligence operations were designed to be invisible. Each night, plain-clothed Praetorians would filter into Rome's taverns, brothels, bathhouses, and even private dinner parties, gathering information and monitoring sentiment. This wasn't random eavesdropping. Evidence suggests they operated with remarkable sophistication. The Praetorians divided Rome into surveillance sectors, corresponding to the city's 14 administrative regions. Each sector had a designated officer known as the Umbra, Shadow, who coordinated intelligence gathering in that area and maintained a network of paid informants. Archaeological evidence supports this reconstruction. Excavations of Praetorian quarters revealed small sealed rooms containing writing tablets with cryptic notations, location markers, and what appear to be payment records. More telling are the discovery of distinctive lead tokens bearing the Praetorian insignia. Historians now believe these were used to pay informants without leaving a money trail. The intelligence gathering followed a strict nocturnal schedule. At sunset, selected Praetorians would change into civilian clothes in specialized changing rooms. Archaeological evidence suggests were located near the barracks gates. They would leave individually or in pairs, never in large groups that might draw attention. These men weren't randomly selected. Evidence indicates the Guard maintained a special section of officers specifically trained for intelligence work. Men selected for their ability to blend in, manipulate conversations, and remember details. Fragmentary training documents suggest they were taught to affect different accents and mannerisms to move between Rome's diverse social classes undetected. By midnight, these intelligence officers would rendezvous with their sector's Umbra at predetermined locations throughout the city, often at nondescript temples or commercial establishments owned by Guard supporters. There, they would share information gathered during the evening's first half. The most sensitive information, particularly anything concerning plots against the emperor or unrest among the senatorial class, would be immediately taken to the Castra Praetoria by designated messengers. Less urgent intelligence would be compiled by the Umbra and delivered at dawn. But the night intelligence operation didn't just gather information, it actively shaped public opinion. Praetorians would plant rumors beneficial to the Guard or the emperor, discredit emerging opponents, and sometimes deliver subtle threats to problematic individuals. Let me interrupt myself here to address something many of you are probably wondering. How do we know about something designed to be secret? The answer lies in what happened when the system failed. When emperors were assassinated despite this surveillance network, as with Caligula and Domitian, subsequent investigations and purges brought aspects of the system to light. Additionally, disgruntled former Praetorians occasionally revealed operational details, particularly during the civil wars that periodically engulfed Rome. The most dramatic evidence comes from the reign of Commodus. In 190 CE, a former Praetorian named Julius Soter publicly accused the Guard of maintaining what he called a shadow army within Rome. Though quickly silenced, historical sources simply note he died suddenly. His brief testimony was recorded in senatorial debates and provides rare confirmation of the night intelligence operations. What made this system particularly effective was how it complemented the Guard's legitimate daytime security functions. The same Praetorian who gathered intelligence in a senator's home at night might stand guard at imperial audiences the next day, observing how that senator behaved in the emperor's presence and noting any inconsistencies. The night intelligence network served multiple masters. Officially, it protected the emperor by identifying threats before they materialized. In practice, it also served the Praetorian prefect's ambitions and the Guard's institutional interests. Information was power, and the Praetorians controlled what information reached the emperor. The most sophisticated emperors recognized this filtration system and developed countermeasures. Augustus, always the innovator, maintained his own separate intelligence network as a check on the Praetorians. Claudius famously disguised himself to gather information directly. Trajan restructured how intelligence reports were delivered, requiring multiple officers to present findings simultaneously to prevent manipulation. Less adept emperors became functionally captive to the Praetorian information monopoly, seeing Rome and the empire only through the lens the Guard provided. This information control partly explains why rulers like Caligula and Nero became increasingly paranoid and detached from reality. They were making decisions based on intelligence deliberately curated to manipulate them. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect was how the night surveillance network could be turned against the emperor himself. In the lead-up to imperial assassinations, The Praetorians would often use their intelligence apparatus to isolate the emperor, feeding him information that would cause him to alienate potential allies and making him increasingly dependent on the guard for protection. Protection they could withdraw at the moment of their choosing. If you're finding this information valuable, hit that like button. It directly helps this video reach others who appreciate uncensored history. Now, let's delve into perhaps the most mysterious aspect of Praetorian night activities: their religious practices. These weren't the public ceremonies Romans performed in daylight at state temples, but secretive rituals performed in darkness, blending traditional Roman religion with foreign mystery cults and unique traditions developed within the Guard itself. Religious activity in Rome typically occurred during daylight hours. Nighttime worship was often viewed with suspicion, associated with foreign cults or subversive activities. The fact that the Praetorians conducted religious ceremonies at night immediately set them apart from conventional Roman practice and shrouded their worship in mystery. Archaeological excavations at the Castra Praetoria revealed a curious feature: a small temple-like structure in the northwest corner of the complex that doesn't appear in any official architectural plans. The temple's orientation and design suggest it was dedicated to deities associated with night, protection, and secrecy. Inside this structure, archaeologists found unusual ritual implements and altars with dedications to traditional Roman gods like Jupiter and Mars, but also to more obscure deities rarely worshipped publicly: Nox, night; Somnus, sleep; and most tellingly, Arcanus, secrecy, a minor deity barely mentioned in surviving Roman religious texts. This section discusses historical allegations about religious practices in antiquity. We'll focus on the political implications and evidence without graphic detail. The Praetorians' religious practices appear to have evolved over time, incorporating elements from the diverse backgrounds of Guard members. While initially drawn primarily from central Italy, by the late 1st century CE, the Guard included men from throughout Italy and eventually from Romanized provinces, each bringing religious influences from their homelands. From fragmentary evidence, we can reconstruct some elements of their night worship. On the Calends, first day of each month, the Praetorians would conduct a ritual called the Vigilia Sacra, sacred vigil. This ceremony began at sunset and continued until dawn, with different activities marking each watch of the night. The first watch involved purification rituals. Officers would circulate through the barracks with censers containing burning herbs, while reciting prayers for protection. Analysis of residue found in ceremonial burners suggests they used a mixture of traditional Roman incense combined with herbs associated with clarity of mind and wakefulness. During the second watch, the focus shifted to divination, interpreting omens to predict future threats to the emperor and Rome. Unlike public Roman divination, which relied on observing bird flight or examining animal entrails, the Praetorians developed their own methods focused on patterns of shadow and light. They would place oil lamps in specific formations and interpret the resulting shadows cast on temple walls. The third watch centered on what fragmentary texts call the communion with guardian spirits. Each Praetorian cohort maintained a shrine containing symbolic representations of deceased members who had performed noteworthy services. During this portion of the night, officers would recite their names and deeds, maintaining a spiritual lineage and reminding current members of the Guard's historical purpose. The fourth and final watch, ending at dawn, involved renewal of oaths and dedication to protective duties for the coming month. This was the only portion of the night rituals where the emperor was explicitly centered, with prayers for his safety and prosperity. Though, as we've discussed earlier, this apparent loyalty was conditional. Beyond these monthly observances, the Guard also conducted seasonal ceremonies aligned with the Roman calendar, but modified for their specific needs. The most important was held during the Saturnalia in December. But while the rest of Rome celebrated with revelry and role reversals, the Praetorians performed what limited evidence suggests was a solemn ritual reaffirming their role as protectors of the cosmic order. I should note that our understanding of these practices comes primarily from archaeological evidence, rather than written accounts. Official Roman historians had little interest in documenting the religious practices of soldiers, particularly ones conducted in private. However, physical evidence, ritual spaces, implements, dedicatory inscriptions, and unusual structural features of the barracks provides compelling evidence for these night ceremonies. The religious practices served practical functions beyond spiritual needs. They reinforced group cohesion, provided psychological support for men with dangerous responsibilities, and created sacred justifications for political actions. When the Praetorians decided an emperor needed to be removed, they could frame it not just as a political necessity, but as a religious duty to maintain cosmic order. Emperors had complex relationships with these religious practices. Some, like Claudius and Hadrian, participated in modified versions of the rituals to strengthen bonds with the guard. Others, particularly those with their own strong religious convictions, viewed the Praetorians' night ceremonies with suspicion. The most dramatic conflict came during the reign of Elagabalus, 218–222 CE, who attempted to replace traditional Roman worship with the Syrian sun god El-Gabal. When he tried to force the Praetorians to abandon their night rituals in favor of his solar worship conducted at dawn, he met fierce resistance. This religious conflict contributed significantly to his eventual assassination. The religious dimension of Praetorian night activities adds another layer to understanding their power. They weren't merely the emperor's bodyguards or a political force. They positioned themselves as religious protectors with a divine mandate. This spiritual authority helped justify their interventions in imperial succession and governance. After the Constantine's rise to power and the gradual Christianization of the Roman military in the 4th century CE, these pagan night rituals became increasingly problematic. Some historians suggest this religious incompatibility contributed to Constantine's decision to effectively disband the traditional Praetorian Guard in 312 CE, replacing them with the Scholae Palatinae who lacked the independent religious traditions of their predecessors. We've explored the Praetorians' political machinations, intelligence operations, and religious practices, but at their core, they were still soldiers. However, their training went far beyond what regular legionaries received, particularly the specialized combat techniques practiced exclusively at night. While daytime training focused on conventional military skills, formation fighting, siege techniques, and standard weapons handling, nighttime was reserved for teaching what Roman sources euphemistically called close work, or what we might call today specialized assassination and covert operation techniques. The Praetorians faced unique tactical challenges. Unlike frontier legionaries who fought foreign enemies in open battlefields, they operated in densely packed urban environments, often against Roman citizens. They needed to neutralize threats to the emperor quickly, quietly, and sometimes with plausible deniability. This required specialized training that would have been inappropriate for regular troops. Archaeological evidence supports this reconstruction. Excavations of training areas within the Castra Praetoria revealed unusual features not found in standard Roman military facilities. Soundproofed rooms with reinforced walls, specialized target dummies with marked vital points, and practice weapons designed for precision rather than power. Night training typically began 3 hours after sunset, when the barracks' main activities had ceased and privacy was assured. Junior Praetorians would train under veteran officers who specialized in particular techniques. These training officers held a special designation. Fragmentary evidence suggests they were called doctores umbrae, or teachers of shadow. Training focused on several key areas distinct from conventional Roman military skills. First was silent movement. Techniques for navigating urban environments, imperial residences, and crowded spaces without detection. Praetorians learned to move in different types of footwear and on various surfaces while minimizing noise. Archaeological evidence includes specialized sandals with modified soles that reduced sound. Second was what limited sources call swift hand techniques. Unarmed combat methods for quickly incapacitating opponents without weapons. Unlike the wrestling practiced in Roman military training, these techniques emphasized speed, precision strikes to vulnerable areas, and methods for silently neutralizing sentries or bodyguards. Third was the use of concealable weapons, small blades, garrots, and other implements that could be hidden under togas or ceremonial uniforms. Practice weapons recovered from the Castra Praetoria include unusual designs not standard in Roman military equipment: narrow-bladed daggers, weighted cords, and small, easily concealed projectile weapons. Perhaps most specialized was training in what fragmentary sources call the emperor's defense, techniques specifically for evacuating the emperor from danger. Praetorians practiced rapid formation changes, human shield tactics, and emergency extraction routes from all major imperial residences and public venues. These drills often used a stand-in wearing imperial regalia, with officers playing the role of potential assassins. I want to pause here to address something that might seem contradictory. Why would men, who sometimes assassinated emperors, train so diligently to protect them? The answer highlights the Guard's complex nature. The Praetorians saw themselves as protectors not just of the individual emperor, but of the imperial office and Rome itself. An emperor they decided to remove through their internal processes was, in their view, a threat to the very institution they were sworn to defend. Night training served practical purposes beyond skill development. It acclimated Praetorians to operating in darkness, crucial for both protection and covert operations. It also created operational security, ensuring that the Guard's most sensitive tactics remained hidden from potential adversaries, including the political elite who might interact with the Praetorians during daylight hours. The specialized training regime evolved over time. In the early imperial period under Augustus and Tiberius, it focused primarily on defensive techniques and crowd control. By the time of Nero and the Flavian dynasty, evidence suggests greater emphasis on offensive skills and covert operations, reflecting the Guard's expanding role in monitoring potential threats throughout Rome. Interestingly, some techniques appear to have been borrowed from foreign traditions. Archaeologically recovered training manuals include terminology suggesting influences from Persian, Egyptian, and Greek martial practices, knowledge likely brought back by officers who had served in the eastern provinces. The training wasn't limited to physical techniques. Praetorians also received specialized psychological preparation. They practiced maintaining composure during imperial audiences, recognizing subtle indicators of threat in civilian behavior, and techniques for intimidation without explicit threats, skills essential for their public role as the visible manifestation of imperial authority. One of the most specialized aspects of night training involved practicing for what documents cryptically call imperial transitions, the carefully orchestrated removal and replacement of emperors. These exercises allegedly included practicing quick seizure of key locations in Rome, secure communications during political crises, and methods for isolating an emperor from potential supporters. When Septimius Severus disbanded the Praetorian Guard in 193 CE after they had auctioned off the imperial throne, he was particularly concerned with eliminating knowledge of these specialized techniques. Historical sources note that he not only dismissed the Praetorians but executed many of their training officers specifically to prevent these methods from being taught to others, a testament to how dangerous he considered these skills. The night training regime created a significant military advantage. While the Praetorians numbered only around 9, 0 to 12, 0 men, compared to over 150 legionaries, their specialized training made them far more effective in their specific urban operating environment. A small group of Praetorians could control key points in Rome more effectively than a much larger force of conventional troops. Let's examine what might have been the most consequential of all Praetorian night rituals: the protocols and procedures they enacted during imperial succession crises, what limited sources call the Night of Long Shadows. When an emperor died, whether from natural causes, assassination, or battlefield defeat, Rome entered a period of acute vulnerability. Power vacuums in autocratic systems are dangerous, and the transfer of imperial authority required careful management. While daylight would bring public ceremonies and Senate proceedings, the critical hours immediately following an emperor's death belonged to the Praetorians and their carefully developed night protocols. These procedures were never officially documented in histories, but archaeological evidence and fragmentary accounts allow us to reconstruct the basic framework. The process began the moment an emperor's death was confirmed, with the Guard implementing what appears to have been called the Nox Transitionis, the night of transition. First came securing the body. The Praetorians would immediately take possession of the emperor's remains, partly out of respect, but primarily to control information. By controlling the corpse, they controlled the announcement of death, giving themselves time to implement subsequent measures before public knowledge created chaos. Next was securing key locations throughout Rome. Archaeological evidence and scattered textual references indicate the Guard maintained a list of vital control points to be occupied immediately during succession crises: the imperial treasury, granaries, water distribution centers, city gates, and communications hubs. Praetorian officers carried sealed orders to be opened only upon an emperor's death, containing their assignment to these locations. Perhaps most crucial was information control. The Guard would dispatch riders to provincial governors and legionary commanders, ensuring the Praetorians' version of events reached key power players before independent messengers arrived with possibly contradictory accounts. This allowed them to frame the narrative around succession and influence who would be considered legitimate contenders for the throne. While these practical security measures were underway, a more secretive ritual was conducted within the Castra Praetoria. The Praetorian prefect and senior officers would convene what limited evidence suggests was called the Concilium Noctis, the Night Council, to determine their position on succession. This section discusses historical allegations about succession practices in antiquity. We'll focus on the political implications and evidence without graphic detail. Archaeological evidence from the Castra Praetoria includes a chamber specifically designed for this purpose, a semicircular room with acoustic properties that prevented eavesdropping and seating arranged to eliminate hierarchy among participants. Each officer would speak in turn, assessing potential successors against criteria that evolved over time, but generally included military competence, attitude toward the Guard's privileges, and ability to maintain stability. The Night Council wasn't merely deliberative, it was also transactional. Historical accounts from the year of 4 emperors, 69 CE, and the period following Commodus's assassination, 192 CE, indicate that potential emperors or their representatives would meet with Praetorian leaders during these crisis nights, negotiating for support. The famous Auction of the Empire when Didius Julianus purchased the throne was simply a more explicit version of negotiations that had long occurred behind closed doors. Once the Praetorians selected their preferred candidate, they would implement the final stage of their succession protocol, manufacturing legitimacy. Before dawn, they would escort their chosen successor to the Senate, where the presence of armed Praetorians inevitably influenced the Senate's free deliberation on confirming the new emperor. The succession protocols weren't static. They evolved based on previous successes and failures. After particularly chaotic transitions, evidence suggests the Guard would conduct reviews and modify their procedures. A fragmentary document discovered in the 1980s appears to contain revisions to the protocols following Caligula's assassination, adding measures to better control public reactions and prevent rival claimants from rallying support. What made these night protocols particularly powerful was their quasi-religious nature. They weren't merely practical security measures, but rituals that sacralized the Praetorians' role in succession. By conducting these activities at night, shrouded in secrecy and ceremony, they gave their political machinations an air of divine sanction and cosmic significance. The most successful emperors recognized the importance of these succession rituals and worked to co-opt them. Augustus, always the master strategist, cultivated relationships with key Praetorian officers years before his death and reportedly left detailed instructions for his funeral that incorporated elements of their protocols, effectively posthumously directing what was meant to be an independent process. Similarly, Marcus Aurelius spent the last decade of his reign gradually integrating his son Commodus into Praetorian ceremonies and rituals, ensuring that by the time of succession, the Guard viewed Commodus not as an external candidate, but as an insider already initiated into their customs. Less adept emperors ignored these rituals at their peril. Historical sources note that Pertinax, who ruled briefly after Commodus's assassination, attempted to bypass the traditional night protocols and deal directly with the Senate. This perceived slight, combined with his attempts to reform Praetorian privileges, contributed to his assassination after just 86 days in power. The ultimate power of the Night of Long Shadows lay in its deniability. While everyone in Rome's political class understood the Praetorians' role in succession, the nocturnal timing and ritual framework allowed for the fiction of constitutional process to be maintained in daylight. Emperors selected in nighttime negotiations with the Guard could still claim legitimate selection by the Senate and people of Rome. This dynamic created a dual reality in Roman political life: the public constitutional proceedings visible to all, and the shadow rituals of the Praetorians that often predetermined their outcomes. The tension between these parallel systems drove much of the instability in imperial succession throughout the first 3 centuries CE. When Constantine effectively disbanded the traditional Praetorian Guard in 312 CE, he specifically targeted these succession protocols. His reforms of imperial bodyguards divided protective responsibilities among multiple units, ensuring no single military body could develop the institutional knowledge and ritual framework to control succession as the Praetorians had. We've explored the secret tribunals, blood oaths, intelligence networks, religious ceremonies, specialized combat training, and succession protocols that comprise the night rituals of the Praetorian Guard. Now, let's examine the broader question. How did these hidden practices shape Roman history, and what legacy did they leave? The most obvious impact was on imperial stability, or rather, instability. The Praetorians' night rituals created parallel power structures that undermined the official constitutional framework. While Augustus established the Principate with carefully balanced powers and responsibilities, the Guard's secretive practices introduced unpredictable elements that no institutional design could fully contain. Statistics tell the story. Of the 36 emperors who ruled between Augustus and Constantine, excluding co-emperors and regional usurpers, 13 were assassinated by the Praetorians or with their complicity. Several others were forced to commit suicide when Praetorian support wavered. This 36% mortality rate reveals how the Guard's night deliberations literally determined who lived and died at the pinnacle of Roman power. Beyond the body count lies a subtler impact: the psychological effect on imperial governance. Emperors who understood the Guard's rituals governed differently than those who remained ignorant. Rulers like Claudius and Hadrian, who actively studied and participated in modified versions of Praetorian ceremonies, were able to manipulate these systems to their advantage, resulting in longer, more stable reigns. Others, particularly those who came to power from outside Rome's political elite or from distant provinces, often failed to grasp the importance of these shadow rituals. Maximinus Thrax and Philip the Arab, both capable administrators, never fully integrated into the Praetorians' ritual world and paid with their lives when crises emerged. The night rituals also influenced broader Roman society through information control. The Guard's nocturnal intelligence gathering shaped what information reached the emperor, and consequently, what policies were implemented. When Praetorians manipulated intelligence to serve their institutional interests, they effectively redirected imperial attention and resources. This information filtration had tangible effects on governance. Historical evidence suggests periods of particularly intense persecution of certain groups, often correlated with the Guard's institutional priorities, rather than genuine imperial concerns. Several emperors' seemingly erratic policy shifts make more sense when viewed through the lens of changing Praetorian intelligence briefings. The religious dimension of Praetorian rituals also left a complex legacy. By developing their own sacred practices outside mainstream Roman religion, they contributed to the fragmentation of religious authority in the late imperial period. The Guard's blend of traditional Roman worship with mystery elements and foreign influences exemplified the religious syncretism that would eventually transform Roman spiritual life. When Constantine embraced Christianity and disbanded the traditional Praetorian Guard, he wasn't just making a military reorganization, he was eliminating a parallel religious authority that could potentially challenge his new spiritual direction for the empire. The Guard's night rituals represented an older pagan Rome that needed to be dismantled for his new vision to succeed. Perhaps the most enduring impact was on Roman historical consciousness. The deliberately hidden nature of Praetorian practices created gaps in the historical record that Romans themselves struggled to fill. When Tacitus and Suetonius attempted to explain imperial politics, they often resorted to personality-based explanations for events actually driven by institutional forces operating in the shadows. This great man approach to Roman history, focusing on emperors' personal qualities rather than the system surrounding them, persisted for centuries. Only in recent decades have historians begun to fully appreciate how institutions like the Praetorian Guard, with their hidden practices and rituals, shaped the empire's trajectory independent of individual personalities. For modern scholars, the Praetorians offer important lessons about institutional power. Organizations granted exclusive control over information, security, and succession developed their own interests and rituals to protect those interests. What began as Augustus's personal bodyguard evolved into a king-making institution with its own agenda and methods, capable of overriding the very authority it was created to protect. The Guard's night rituals reveal how power operates in the shadows, even in systems with elaborate public ceremonies and constitutional frameworks. While Roman citizens witnessed the pageantry of imperial governance in daylight, the decisions that truly shaped the empire often occurred during nocturnal deliberations behind barracks walls. This pattern, public ceremony masking private power, has repeated throughout history. From Byzantine court politics to modern security states, organizations tasked with protection inevitably develop their own rituals, interests, and methods that may diverge from their official mandate. The Praetorian night rituals also demonstrate how institutional memory functions. Despite never being officially documented, these practices persisted for over 3 centuries through oral transmission, ritualized training, and physical spaces designed for specific ceremonies. When examining historical institutions, we must look beyond written records to understand their true functioning. For those who study modern power transitions, the Praetorians offer a sobering case study in how protectors can become kingmakers. Their succession protocols, developed ostensibly to maintain stability during transitions, ultimately gave them veto power over the very system they were designed to preserve. As we conclude our exploration of these hidden practices, I want to emphasize that understanding the Praetorians isn't merely academic. Their evolution from protective force to shadow government illustrates patterns that continue to shape political institutions today. By studying how their night rituals functioned, we gain insight into the delicate relationship between security forces and the authorities they ostensibly serve. The final legacy of the Praetorian Guard may be this warning. Power granted in the name of security will inevitably seek to secure itself first. Their night rituals, tribunals judging emperors, oaths binding members to the institution rather than the ruler, intelligence operations serving internal agendas, all reflect this fundamental reality. As we've seen throughout this investigation, what happened in Rome after dark wasn't just a footnote to imperial history. It was often where that history was truly made. If you found value in this historical journey, please support by liking, subscribing, and sharing this video with others who appreciate unfiltered history. Your engagement allows us to continue bringing hidden historical truths to light. Remember that history's most important lessons often lurk in its darkest corners.